How's everyone doing? So, Strength Chat episode 69, and today I have got a very special guest for you. Today I am joined by a strength and conditioning coach who's worked with various baseball teams, and he's also been involved in research to help improve the training program for people with cystic fibrosis. Today I am joined by Taylor Lewis. How are you doing?
Good. How's it going? Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
No worries at all. What have you been up to? What have you been working on recently? How are you doing?
Well, so it's kind of funny we're doing this because this month is May. May is Cystic Fibrosis Awareness Month. So we've been putting together a couple programs that we're doing with the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation for online exercise training. And it's kind of been fun, very busy in a sense just because this stuff's new relatively when we're talking about application of stuff. So we've been trying to, research and kind of in the lab type stuff to kind of get the best exercises for these programs to help people with CF and eventually other pulmonary diseases as well. So it's been fun, but very chaotic the last few weeks.
All right, we'll keep you busy. So obviously you mentioned there about the work that you've done with working with patients with cystic fibrosis. For anyone who might not know your background and how you got involved in working with people with cystic fibrosis, do you just want to give a little bit of a background to yourself?
Yeah. So let's see. I started out as a strength and conditioning coach. It's now close to. I kind of got a little bit involved when I played baseball in California. I got a strength coach there. I played at a Division II school, Sonoma State University, and we didn't really have a professional strength coach in a sense. It was just usually the coach hired someone outside of it to do our strength and conditioning. And so in the summer, when I started to get involved in a sense with training, because I played baseball there, I started to realize how cool, anatomy is, the biomechanics, the physiology, just the power output and the capacity needed to play. I kind of got a little bit more involved in the science portion of it. And then when I graduated, I went kind of just around looking, just trying to figure out what was the best approach in learning. And that was a big key for me was I went and paid my dues, in a sense, spent my own money to go learn from Mike Boyle, Dan John, Eric Cressy, just anyone and everyone that would be, willing to talk to me about exercise. And then I became the strength coach at Sonoma State for baseball, and I was there for 5 years, where I got to work with some collegiate athletes that had, some remarkable capabilities, and then shifted that to working with some major league players and some pro guys, and still currently do that. But I think it's now 6 years now. When I was going through my master's program, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do for my project, and at first I was looking into like post-activation potentiation and stuff like that. And after looking at all the research, there was a lot there. And I'm a type of person likes to investigate and work on stuff there's not as much. And so it wasn't as interested, but I was thinking about doing it. And then my brother is a doctor at he's a CF doctor at Stanford Hospital in Palo Alto. And he had come to me right when I'm about to kind of finalize my project, where I'm going to be going and start actually doing the investigation. And he asked me if I would start working with some of his patients with cystic fibrosis. And I had no idea what cystic fibrosis was. Yeah. And he was saying he was seeing patients in the hospital, and they'd be in there for 2 to 3 weeks just because they had exacerbating symptoms and they were hospitalized, and they were asking for exercise programs, and he didn't know what to do. He, referred him to the physical therapist, but there was a lot of 5-pound weights and an exercise bike. Right. And that was pretty much a general thing. And so they kept on asking for more and more. And he just says, after you're done with school, would you think about doing this? And I was like, let's just do my whole project on this. So we took a patient with CF, and we used Dan John's kind of model of volume over time, low intensity type things. And when I was looking at the research, I saw that there was little bit done on strength training and the impact that's having on CF. So we took out all cardio. We did specifically strength training, low volumes, about 50 to 60% of their max, 3 days a week with only about 15 repetitions. And in 12 weeks, we showed an improvement in lung function, strength, muscle endurance. And that's where it kind of hit me where this is where I want to go. I come from my dad was a sports medicine doctor. My mom was a special education teacher. So I love the science and I love the teaching. And when I saw that, something that's always resonated with me was Dan John says, make a difference, find a community that you can help. And after being mentored by Dan, it'd be like 4 years at that point, I was like, this just fits into what I want to do. Being an athlete, I didn't want to, push away working with players. So I still work with major league players and college and high school guys, but I'm shifting about 50% and eventually probably most of my time to researching the effects exercise has on CF for more of an application standpoint, in a sense of the stuff you're going to be working in the gym, resistance training at higher loads, maybe a little bit more high intensity. So it's been fun to kind of take that route and then kind of just help advance the research that's being done on CF and exercise, because it's coming along. But it's good that we have some steps we need to take for the future, and here we are today, kind of talking now. So.
Oh, cool. So, do the patients come and see you at your own facility, or are you based at the hospital? How does that work?
Yeah, so as we grow right now, there's a combination. So I have a good relationship with the Stanford CF centers, and we have some with down in Southern California too. We first started with more of an online platform because when they're in the clinics, they could be there for 2 to 3 hours, and so they don't have as much time. And some of them will fly into Stanford from down south of California and stuff like that. So usually when they're there, it's very for a strict purpose. As we grow, our goal is to have this integration where they see us. But right now, we currently do a lot of stuff online through our exercise app, and we do all of that. And then we have a few people that will come into the facility here and there that are in the local area, but a lot of it's done via kind of telemedicine in a sense.
Right. Okay. So obviously you mentioned there, before we sort of delve too much into it, I'm just going to backtrack a little bit. Obviously you mentioned when you first got involved with it, you were a little bit unsure of what cystic fibrosis is. And the more, obviously it's a topic that I'm not 100% on, but as you said, there's more research going on to it, and especially getting involved in training, is that people are coming a lot more aware of it. Do you just want to give a little bit of an explanation of what actually cystic fibrosis is for the people listening?
Yeah. So cystic fibrosis is an autosomal recessive disease in which both parents have to have a carrying of this gene. And this gene we all have the gene. It's a mutation in the DNA on the chromosome 7 where it alters this CFTR regulator, or cystic fibrosis transducent regulator, which is an ion channel. And when that mutation, so there's 17,000 different mutations of it. So there are very specific ones that are seen common, like Delta 508. But there's up to 17,000 different mutations. So it could be non-existent. People with CF may not have it. It could be mutated where it's not working functionally. It could not work at all. And the thing with CF, it's a multifactorial disease in a sense. It's known for the lungs, but 85% of people have pancreatic insufficiency, which means they can't absorb enzymes well, which means nutrients is hard to digest and stuff like that. Some have CF diabetes. It attacks the GI tract in different ways. So there's a lot of different factors when it comes to it, but kind of just going with the lungs and stuff like that. What happens is when this mutation is, or when there's an alteration in the mutation, then the chloride, because this is a sodium chloride channel in a sense, so the chloride can't leave the cell to then attract water right where the cilia is, that kind of pushes and beats mucus out. So we're able to clear bacteria and mucus and stuff like that. Now, when there's an alteration in that gene, the sodium can't go into the cell, which can't push out the chloride. So this is like an direct, indirect effect, which means then there's less water at the cilia. So then when this fluid imbalance is altered, mucus builds up, and within the mucus is bacteria. So then there starts to be inflammatory responses, and then eventually scarring and necrosis of the lung tissue. And this ultimately leads to a decrease in lung function and stuff like that, based on the physiological standpoint from a lungs perspective and stuff like that. And this happens in the pancreas, the livers too. It's slightly different in a sense, depending on which organ you're talking about.
Yeah. So when you mentioned there about it's quite hard for, on one aspect, it's sometimes hard for people to digest certain nutrients. With the work that you do you focus on the nutrition side of it, or are you looking more into the nutrition side of it?
Yeah, as we grow as a company, so my company is Pulmonary Performance Institute, and we have the CFFI division, which this is kind of my division. This is my baby in a group. So as we grow, we're working with COPD and other kind of areas too. But we're gonna eventually. I always have them talk to their CF specific nutritionist at their clinic. If they don't have a clinic, we always recommend we have people that we can send them to or email, just because it's very specific, because they could be on various drugs. Their mutation could be different. So yes, there's the general, everyone needs protein, carbohydrates, fats, and stuff like that. And then with CF, what's highly known is a decrease in BMI and body weight.
Yes.
So when they talk to the nutritionist, a big thing is just keep eating high calories.
Yeah.
And so this is, I think, where context comes to play when you're talking about athletes. You're talking about with CF, you can walk by someone and hear a highly successful, educator talk about how you need to eat more fats, like pizzas and hamburgers, and an exercise person walks by like, how I can't believe they're telling them that. Yeah. Well, when we're talking about CF, first thing is gain weight. Once you're gaining weight, then we can start talking about what are the better choices of how to, take in calories. But we have to start general and say, let's start increasing your body fat and stuff, or just your weight in general. And then we can start to get a little bit specific. And this is the same thing with athletes as well. So we at first will send them to a CF specialist, nutrition specialist first. If they don't have one or can't get a hold of one, it's always the recommendations of increased calories, healthy fats, high protein, carbohydrates, because of, some of them will take up to 40 enzymes a day just to try and digest food. So that's a factor. You have to see how pancreatic insufficient they are. Are they allergic to anything with their medications they're on? Is that going to alter anything? So there's a lot of context to it. So we try to shift out first, but and do general nutrition in the beginning.
Yeah. When you mention it there's quite a lot of rabbit holes that you can go down, really. There's quite a lot of branches that tree, if you like. And when you mention in there, using the example of when you're working with athletes, you might look at their previous or working with, the general population, you might look at their previous training, previous injuries. But I suppose, looking at the other aspect of it, if people are taking medication, if they struggle with certain things, that for me makes, why, obviously asking you to be a guest, it's quite an interesting topic. And ultimately, the more research and the more things that are spoken about it will help people a little bit more. Obviously, you mentioned that when you did your masters, you worked a little bit with the strength training and the success that had. What was the research saying prior to that? Was the research mainly focused on, sort of the conditioning side of things, or how much was based on the strength side of things?
Yeah, so when I first started, and this was like 6 years ago, there was limited done on strength training in a sense. It was like, we're going to focus on lung capacity because obviously that's a big thing. So a lot of it was based on, a lot of exercise testing was based on, some standardized tests in CF world is like a 6-minute walk test where they walk back and forth a certain amount of meters for 6 minutes. A 3-minute step test where they step up and down a box. But a lot of testing was done more cardiovascular because they first wanted to see what the effects were exercise on the lungs, because that's a big thing. And then it was like, just do whatever strength training you want to do. So there wasn't as specifically geared towards, hey, we're going to do 3 sets of 8 at 70% of your 1 rep max and stuff like that. It was more, yes, we know strength training works. We're not there yet.
Okay.
in the last 6 years, however, they're starting to see more. It's like, okay, they're looking at the actual muscle tissue and stuff like that, because the CFTR gene does affect the skeletal muscle because it is an ion channel. So they're also looking at that, but there's so many, indirect categories that are placed. You don't know exactly specifically what's happening at the tissue.
Yeah.
But what they're showing is strength training, is a viable thing where you can improve strength, and that can correlate over to something else. I think a key with it is we talk about, when we're talking about improving cardiovascular endurance or doing cardiovascular testing, a lot of times when you're doing it like in a lab, you're going to do it on a bike.
Yeah.
You can do it on a treadmill, but it sometimes will get hard and you need the right devices for it. And when you go from a bike to ground, we lose the force and the ground reaction and stuff like that. So on a bike can tell you one thing about exercise capacity for the lungs, VO2, but if you now take that person and if you can put them in a scenario where they have the same, setup, but they're actually adding ground reaction forces, that's going to change things a little bit. It's like a swimmer trying to beat someone that, it'd be like a swimmer swimming and then going out and then running, like trying to compete in a marathon, where someone in a marathon competes, in swimming. There's going to be a difference. And do they have the viable strength so they can reduce the capacity needed and stuff like that? So I wanted to start to integrate, okay, that's great that we show that cardiovascular endurance can be improved through aerobic training, but what happens when they go into the gym or they do stuff at home? We need to start to integrate forces and different angles and kind of the biomechanics of things, because force will alter how your body's going to respond. And so, I also wanted to start looking into it more for application, because we're not going to necessarily read the studies, but you want to know that if they can do these exercises, if they're going to carry over to the actual gym and stuff like that. So we started to see, is like, all right, maybe we should start doing some strength training, not 1 rep maxes, but maybe like, 10 reps and stuff like that, something a little bit more viable to see, okay, what's the correlation with strength and aerobic endurance and stuff like that? Because you may have the capacity on a bike, but then you get off that bike and you try and simulate the same thing. Things will change a little bit. So we wanted to also show that we don't need to think of strength training as like maximum strength training, the typical, I'm going to lift as heavy as I physically can, because that's obviously going to hinder people in the CF community, because their capacity is a little bit lower in a sense. And if they think that I have to do heavy strength training to improve my lung function, some of them may, kind of back away from it. Now, our fitness enthusiasts are going to be all for it. But what we show in multiple case studies is that you can do low volume training, over the course of 3 days and improve strength and lung function. And just like anything else, it's more of a consistency thing than a capacity thing. We just don't do it enough, because it may be for some, it could be too light, or it just may be boring, but we don't always have to think we have to redline our workouts in a sense. And this is what we are trying to show people with CF, because they can't redline their workouts, else they could put themselves in the hospital. So we're saying, hey, listen, we can, do lower volume of weight just over a longer course of time, and you can still start to integrate and improve stuff too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a good point when you mentioned there about strength training doesn't have to be maximal training all the time. And I think, since starting this podcast, I mean, for me, I've had quite a lot of guests on that are powerlifters. I compete in powerlifting myself. And obviously powerlifting, that's the sport of, basically, who can lift the heaviest. That's what it is. Exactly the same with weightlifting and strongman, all, stuff that I find really interesting. But, I think strength is relative to that person and what they want it for. Whether that's a person who wants to be able to pick up their kid and play with their kid, or whether they are going for a maximal deadlift. And I think strength training can play a role, exactly how you've said, can play a role in improving the different aspects.
I think too is like like you said, it's context.
Yeah.
So everyone's going to be different, and you have to look at every variable. So we can't pigeonhole, like if you just look at strength, then you're going to lose the aerobic capacity. If you just look at aerobic endurance, you're going to lose the strength, and they're all intertwined based on vectors and angles and your environment, your behavior, how you grew up. I mean, are you the type A person that's going to be like crazy, going to dial up right off the bat? Are you the passive? Like, I know people that are very passive, but you put them under a bar and they turn ferocious, and you're like, what is this? But and the best athletes, I've worked with one of the best athletes in the world, and I remember him saying it's all about just being able to stay focused when need to stay focused, and then be able to like shut off when need to shut off, and having a routine. He knew exactly what time he needed to get to the ballpark. He knew what time he hit. He knew what time he did his recovery work. He knew what time, he ate. He knew what time he had to do this. And then he set in and then did that consistently for 20 years, and is arguably the best hitter ever alive, and has the home run record. So
nice.
There's things with it there's things with it. It's so, unfortunately, it is relative in gray area, because you can have athletes that do bodybuilding, workouts, and then they just thrive at the highest level. And you say, how could that be? Yeah. But we have to also think is there's a genetic thing that some are just gifted. And, if you're at the highest level, there's something about you genetically and that's just different. Yeah. And you put the time and effort, so that we have to take those things into consideration when we're working with whoever it might be. We have to look at multiple factors.
Yeah. Yeah. And that, it comes to that point of, everyone is different. You've got to make sure that you fit what their needs are. The whole thing of, and I'm sure it's been mentioned, numerous times by numerous people, the whole idea of, cookie cutter programs, if you like, just doesn't really work. On the note of programming, obviously the amount of research that you've done over the past couple of years, how has, from the first study that you carried out on strength training, how has the training programs, or what exercises you use, how has the program developed over time?
For the CF, or just in general with our athletes?
CF, yeah.
I think it's like, once again, going back to it, is like, just like you said, cookie cutter programs, they'll work, but only for a certain amount of time, right? 4 weeks may be it, and then it's done. And everyone might be different. It may work for 8 weeks for someone. So we have to look at the testing that's being done before and then in between to make sure that there's a progressive approach. And when working with CF, and this can even be with elite athletes or athletes in general, is, especially with CF, is if we alter one thing, and it can negatively affect them dramatically where they're in the hospital. Now, like, that can be an extreme and stuff like that, but we have to be very precise on how we're looking at testing. We have to look at aerobic endurance. We have to look at strength, their ability to strength. We have to look at their diet, like we said, the behavior and stuff like that. And those are the things that probably grown a lot in what we've been doing with CF, is trying to get every aspect and every data point we can beforehand, because like I said, with 17,000 different mutations, with some going into the clinics, and I've done many hours of observational work in the Stanford CF clinics, and everyone's attitude in the clinic's different, and the environment's different. So understanding the individual at first and how to approach them is very key, because within the first minute, I mean, honestly, within the first 10 seconds, if they don't like you, they're going to write you off. And it doesn't matter if you have the golden program, you have to connect with the person, and you have to create an establishment where you guys are doing this together. Mm-hmm. Because if it's more of like, hey, you need to do this, you need to strength train, you need to do resistance training, you need to do your respiratory training, they're being told every single day, you need to do this to survive. And it's like, instead of saying, hey, what would you like to do? Like, what are the types of things you like to do? So then we can take the science and we can mold it into a fashion that works well for you. So some of the first questions we ask our clients is, what do they like to do? Like, what do they like to do for fun? If they have done exercising, what type of exercise? Is it Zumba? Is it strength training? Is it the elliptical? I could care less. Like, a lot of times, sometimes the judgment comes in where you'll get clients, and then I've done it before. I mean, I've been doing this 12 years, and I remember when I was at my thing popped out. I remember when I was at a Bally's Total Fitness, and they've closed down my first year of training people. And sometimes you would just wonder like why they did what they did, you know, and stuff like that. And being young and stuff like that, I didn't understand why they weren't doing these other things, but the self-awareness and kind of getting the general idea is if they're doing something, it's 10 times better than not doing anything at all. Absolutely. So it's like, if they like to do Zumba and I know they need to do strength training, and I know like doing this other type of cardio is going to be the best for them, I need to meet them, you know, where they're at. And then from there, integrate slowly stuff that they're not doing, or they could improve. Because if Zumba is all they like to do, and I ask if I change their whole program and tell them, oh, I need you to do 3 days of strength training and then you can do Zumba, that's only going to last for a certain amount of time. So it's trying to be a master clinician in a sense of trying to mold what I want and what they want into something that's going to progressively, you know, change into whatever it is. And understanding that programs, I mean, I'll put a client on a 4-week program that lasts 8 weeks. I mean, it just is what it is. Like, there's things are going to happen. They're going to you can get sick. You can go into the hospital. There's things, subtle changes for the healthy individual, that someone with CF, that's going to dramatically change their physiology, their stress, their immune system, the whole 9 yards. So understanding that a 4-week program could last 8 weeks, as long as, you know, we get to the end and we can retest. And that's sometimes hard when we're trying to have, oh, we need to see if this is working perfectly and stuff like that. Well, in order to do that, you have to put someone in a lab, and you have to, you know, take out many variables and be so specific. And that's just not how life is. So if we're seeing an improvement in 8 weeks on a 4-week program, then awesome. I could care less if it took us 8 weeks, because I know throughout the 8 weeks they were doing something. Maybe 1 week it was only 1 day, or maybe they had to take a week off, but they kept moving along. That's all I'm really, you know, what our programs have really grown into, and to understand, because when it's all said and done, it's their life, and you can only help so much without them, you know, helping themselves. And we've really realized we have to meet them where they're at, and then just be grateful first that they're doing this, you know, and meeting them. If it's, like I said, if it's Zumba, then awesome, let's rock Zumba. And all I want you to do is I want you to put in a respiratory train. I've had clients where the only thing we've changed is I give them one breathing exercise. Right. But now they've been with me for over a year. They're doing a lot more, but it's like we started with one breathing exercise. They felt better. They're like, all right, give me more. You have to let them taste it a little bit. You know, it's like food. You're not going to just eat the whole thing if you've never had it. You're going to taste it. Maybe I'll try it again. Oh, I actually like this. And then all of a sudden you're consuming a lot of it. So it's very similar to training versus trying to just shove it down their throat. Yeah. Or unfortunately, sometimes with social media, sees like, oh, you should be doing this and you should be doing that, or I can't believe people do it this way. I remember seeing a post, someone picture of them like with their shirt off, and they're like, this is not the sexy way. Don't think this is the sexy way. You should be doing more functional work. And it's like, says who? Like, if someone wants to be a bodybuilder and take their shirt off and flex, okay, we'll let them then. Like, there's too many worlds of fitness that there's no black and white picture of what's going to be best, because it's so relative. So we've learned that we have to adapt.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. You know, what you mentioned at the start, you know, asking them what they want to do. You look at all the content that's on social media and all that sort of stuff. Everything is do this to lose X amount of fat, do this, do that. This is going to be the best thing. This is going to get you the results. Whereas really sometimes it is just sort of, you know, what do you want to do? And when you sort of, I think it was sort of, you know, when you're talking about buying, if you go straight in and start exactly like you said, right, you need to do this, this, and this. And I think that can sometimes push people away. And I think it's a great point that, you know, you've got to meet them halfway. Because if they say, for example, you know, they are doing something like you mentioned with the Zumba, then at least they are doing something. I am a big advocate of something is better than nothing. You know, it might not be 100% the best thing, but like you say, they've got to buy into what you think your philosophy is on training. Because ultimately, you know, as coaches, we're there to help them, you know, and we want to improve and make them achieve their results. So, you know, like you mentioned about some clients that have worked with you for X amount of years, they have to buy in and, you know, believe what you're doing, and then gradually build it up. That Zumba, like you mentioned, might always stay in the background, but, you know, then you start gradually implementing it a little bit.
Well, and it's the over time thing too, because, and another thing too, as a strength and conditioning coach and exercise physiologist, for me to think that if I write a program for someone and if I believe it's going to be 100% get to where we're at, it's a little bit of ignorance to a sense, unless you've had a multidisciplinary act where you've talked to the doctor, we're talking about like respiratory, pulmonary stuff right now, but this is very similar with athletes in a sense. You have to talk to the other care members, the nurses, the respiratory therapists and stuff like that to see, because to say that this program is going to work perfectly how it is ignorant, because it's not going to, because we're not them. We don't live in their shoes. We see them, you know, a couple hours a week type thing, may talk to them a little bit more. So understanding that it's like, okay, if we're seeing some form of improvement, it's a big win, because that's one less negative thing happening in their life. Yes. So why don't we just look, why does it positive things? It could be someone waking up in the morning and telling them to do a positive saying in the mirror every single day. Maybe we start with that, because if someone is too negative, how are you going to get gains? You know, negative thoughts, how are you going to get gains in a weight room or strength or stuff like that? So maybe it's a behavior thing that you have to change first, or, you know, it may not necessarily be what we think it is sometimes. And understanding our clients and talking to others that also from a different lens have worked with the individual is very, very powerful and stuff like that. And that's what I learned as well, is like you need a good supporting staff. And once again, unfortunately, some of the medical community is sometimes hard to get a hold of, or they're just not, you know, they're not very active in wanting to talk to you about it. It's fine, but we shouldn't correlate that with everyone. Yeah. You know, it's just like anything else. We shouldn't think that every doctor, every nurse, you know, they're so westernized, that they're so outdated, because that's not true. I've talked to many doctors. I mean, I wouldn't be where I'm at without my brother taking that outside approach and say, hey, we need people from the other side to help us here. Yeah. And within that, I've met multiple doctors and nurses says, yes, we've always wanted this. We just never knew how to go, you know, find it in a sense. And they can't just pay someone to go search for people. So it has to be, they have to bump into them or stuff like that, because they're very busy too. Yes. So it takes two sides to be able to be integrative and stuff like that. So to think that, oh, you know, they don't talk to us, so we shouldn't talk to them type thing is, you know, kind of hogwash in a sense. And to try and be proactive. And yeah, I've been turned down by multiple doctors in a sense where they just don't reply back, which is fine. But my inner goal is to help the client. So it's not going to offend me if they're going to, you know, if they're going to not email me back. I'll call someone else. I could care less. This is not a like ego thing. This is not a, you know, emotional attachment. The only attachment I have is to try and get my client better. So that's kind of approach we need to take when we're working with elite athletes, you know, everyone in general. It's like the more we know about the individual, hanging out with him, and then also people around him, the better we can program, especially when we're trying to do this for a long haul and a journey.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you mentioned there about chatting with doctors, it basically comes down to a networking and a referral system, really. You know, there's a physio that works in the gym that I work at, and if something is a little bit outside of my knowledge base, I might have written the program. I'm not 100% sure what's caused that injury. Okay, I'm gonna go speak to the physio. They can look at, and you know, it's a two-way thing. We can work on the program together. I think sometimes, especially, you know, when two different ends of the spectrum are trying to speak to each other, it is okay to chat and, you know, sometimes refer to somebody else and share that knowledge, because ultimately, exactly like what you've said, it comes down to you want to try and help the client as much as you can. And when you're mentioning about the program, the perfect program, if you like, I think it's, as you mentioned, life gets in the way sometimes. Sometimes, you know, a curveball is thrown. So we've got to make sure that the key word that you mentioned is consistency. You know, if it is a 4-week program over 8 weeks, as long as they keep doing something, okay, they might have had a week off, but as long as they keep working through.
Yeah, and that's the thing is like working with an elite athlete, he didn't stretch for 20, he didn't stretch for like, we'll say like 20 years, a very long time. And then his athletic trainer stretched him, and then he pulled a hamstring running down first base.
Right.
Yeah, he's going to be in the Hall of Fame, and he never stretched again. So to say that these programs, everyone needs all of this it's hogwash. It's not true, because some of the most elite athletes are tight for a reason. They need power, they need to coil, they need to explode, and you can't be extremely flexible. And once again, it's obviously going to be relative, maybe when they're done, but that's where it's like, we can't, just because they don't have this certain type of range of motion doesn't mean that they need it. It has to be very relative to the goal.
Yeah. So based on that, obviously mentioning about it's dependent on the person, and there is some tests like you mentioned, the 6-minute walking test or the step up test, depending on the level of lung function from the person. How would that dictate your starting point? If someone has quite a relatively higher lung function compared to somebody that might be actually struggling a little bit more with it, how would that dictate you putting the program together, and how would you work with those people?
Yeah, so I think obviously it will depend. Someone with higher lung functions, in general, we're going to obviously have a faster recovery. We're going to be able to kind of increase the intensity a little bit. Someone with a lower lung function is going to have an elevated heart rate due to trying to get air in and stuff like that. They're going to need a longer recovery. But from a perspective of, like, we first need to see, is it a lung function type thing? Yes, if we put them in the lab and we put the spirometry, that's fine. But we need to then dictate that kind of to ground reaction forces as well. So we look at like a 6-minute walk test, or, depending on what their lung capacity is, you can even kind of dial it up a little bit and do anything from a 300-yard shuttle in a sense. And we've done that with some of our CFers. And then see what they look like on a bike or stuff like that. Because then we can start to see, okay, is this a lung capacity thing, or is the reason why they're shutting down lung capacity is because they don't have the strength. In a general standpoint, trying to not take the cookie cutter, but give an idea is I always like to start at the core in a sense. Even though lung function and capacity is down, the lumbopelvic region where the stable point of base is, and a lot of the axis of rotation is going to be created, is a good place to start. Because if we think about it, when we're standing, we have, there's 9.81 newtons of gravity force on us just standing. So whatever the body weight is, you're already having force on there. Now, if we can't overcome that standing force, then we're going to increase respiratory rate, because we need to facilitate, muscles to be able to do this. So if we can create a better stable base of support, that may, loosen up the intercostal muscles. It may help improve diaphragmatic function, stuff like that. So I always like to start with the core, going from that position. From there, we kind of improve and stuff like that, because we do a lot of diaphragmatic breathing, but I don't like to necessarily look at it as diaphragmatic breathing, because for me, sometimes it sounds like, doing bicep curls. They're like, you need diaphragmatic breathing. Yeah. Yes, the diaphragm is a primary mover of respiration, but they've done research and studies where they've inhibited the diaphragm, and it's altered the intercostal muscles for the rib cage and stuff like that. And they've altered the force vectors of other muscles. So it's an integrative approach between the diaphragm, the intercostal muscles, the internal and external obliques and stuff like that. Yeah. So first getting a stable base of support, then working on that diaphragmatic breathing. So a lot of times, you have we need to get into parasympathetic rest and digest, which is great and awesome, because a lot of times we're wired too much. That's phenomenal. It's kind of like stretching and stuff. If we need to increase flexibility, well, that's awesome, but then we need to train that. So getting, expiration and getting the ribs down during parasympathetic breathing is awesome. Get all the carbon dioxide out. But if you don't have that base of support through the foundation of the core, where like when you tighten up to lock in the spine and everything, then things are going to be altered and changed. So it's good to work on exercises you see a lot with, getting the ribs down and back and stuff like that. But if you're not taking into consideration where the pelvic floor is, you're not taking into consideration where the lumbar spine is, then when you're trying to transfer it to an everyday thing, you're missing something. So if you tuck the rib cage down and back and work on exhalation, phenomenal. You're working on the upper half. However, your lower back is not going to, stay in that neutral position because you're going to an in range of flexion, and then vice versa if you go to extension. So understanding that, creating that force first, and then working on getting ribs and down and back. So then when you stand up and move, you get a better integration, I think is very key. And I like to start there because a lot of times, yes, lung function is down because you can't get rib cage expansion, stuff like that. But sometimes that base of support is usually the cause, in a sense. That's where we kind of like to start. It's not necessarily the cause, but it's a good place to start, because when you breathe in air, you're going to, decrease that intrapleural pressure, and then the air is going to go down, and then you get the diaphragm to work, and then you increase intra-abdominal pressure and then intrathoracic pressure. Now what happens is if you get that diaphragm to go down, but you don't have that stable base of support, you're going to leak somewhere. So then you're going to have to then generate energy somewhere else, because you're expending forces in places they're not kind of functionally moving where it needs to be. So we do like to start integrating, yes, respiratory exercises, but we want those to be locked in with some, true core exercises like the Stu McGill's curl ups and, bird dogs and stuff like that, stuff that are going to really get to the foundation and what kind of the proximal points of the spine. So then we can really challenge the respiratory system, because eventually, like when we're talking about people with CF, you can have a lung function of, 50%. And if we're kind of trying to improve respiration, research has shown that doing respiratory muscles improve respiratory muscles. So when they get up and move and use peripheral muscles, what it shows is as people start to fatigue, since your respiratory muscles are also postural muscles, they'll shift more to being respiratory muscles when your body's at a state of fatigue. Well, if we can reduce the fatigue by creating better core base and stronger peripheral muscles, the legs and the arms, then we may not have to use the respiratory muscles necessarily for respiratory as much, because we've decreased, the energy needed in a sense. And then going more a little physiologically, the oxidation and phosphorylation system in our body uses oxygen. So if we improve the system, that foundation, that we can reduce the amount that we need, then we're going to be able to use that oxygen for ATP and kind of regeneration. So obviously you decrease muscle fatigue in a sense.
That's absolutely, when you think about it like that, you obviously there's more pieces to the puzzle, if you like. I know obviously from the powerlifters that I work with, I'll make sure that their core is nice and strong. And it's interesting that you mentioned about the energy leakage, if you like. You're wasting energy doing something when you need to be focused on what you should be doing. And especially when you mentioned there about depending on the lung function that some people might have. People with a lower lung function, they are going to take longer to recover, and that recovery might even be even longer if there are the energy leaks that you mentioned. With obviously you mentioned some of the McGill exercises as well, like the sit up and the bird dog. Is there any other go-to core exercises that you might put in the program or before the start training, as well as any breathing exercises that you use, or any core and breathing exercises that you find complement each other quite well?
Well, even thinking about it, taking a step back, is like in order to increase the most air, if you look at postural positional places, is standing, right? So if we talk about standing and we talk about gravitational forces, if you're not strong and you're standing, you could be inhibiting lung function right then and there, right? Because the best way to get air into lungs is standing. Sitting is second, and then obviously it's laying down. So posture means something. So if you can't keep a quality posture through strength, then you can do respiratory training and improve respiratory muscles. But if you don't then improve them as a core, movement muscle, then you're not going to get to where you want. So like I said, the bird dog, the curl up, side planks, especially from the knees, regular planks, crawling is very key. I really like ground-based exercises in the beginning, just because we want to establish that and then take them to a standing position and be able to stabilize there. And then as we're doing that, integrating breathing exercises. So understanding that we need to dial up and then dial back down. Just like any phenomenal athlete, they know how to tense up and then they know how to dial back and relax. Well, people with CF need a longer recovery. So what I like to do is we like to put breathing exercises or things that downregulate the system right after a heavy lift, like a deadlift, and we can even look at it movement. If you're going to do an extension-based exercise, maybe you do a flexion-based exercise in a respiratory type thing. And we're not talking necessarily in range, but trying to kind of teeter back and forth in a sense to then improve your down regulation. Because if you can improve or decrease the time it takes for you to deadlift and recover, then obviously you're seeing an improvement, and this is going to transfer over to everyday life. Yeah. So we'll like to, if we have a high intensity deadlift, we'll throw in a respiratory exercise, but then we have to start to dial people back up. I don't want someone to come through a positional breathing exercise, nice and relaxed, and then go deadlift. So we need to start to create a little bit more tension because there's a time and place for it. So there has to be a transition from high tension to low tension while you're integrating it. I like to do a lot of positional breathing exercises, that conscious breathing exercises in the beginning of workouts, because that kind of helps the neural drive. And then at the end of workouts, it's more of the rest, digest, kind of lay there, relax, like you're kind of going to sleep, because then we don't want them to think about it. Because breathing consciously has that neural effect. And so if you think about doing respiratory breathing exercises and really focusing on exhalation or whatever form you decide to do, whether it's RKC breathing and stuff like that, they have a neural effect to it. So you have to place the exercises within a program that are going to kind of mirror what you're trying to accomplish. So in the beginning of the workout, we're trying to dial things up, but we're trying to create a continuum where we can go back and forth. And we want them to kind of start to focus on certain muscles to get them kind of, facilitated and stuff like that. So we'll work on exercises where they have to consciously think about exhalations and then breathing back in appropriate manner and stuff like that. And this is where sets and reps and time in between is going to be, interdependent on the person. And then in the workouts, we'll dial it back just a tad. So they deadlift heavy, come back, do low to medium intensity type, breathing exercise, more towards low, depending on obviously how hard the exercise was before it. Yeah. And then at the very end, we're just dial all the way down low and then try to create that. So there's kind of a flow and mirror with the exercises. And honestly, when it's specific exercises, it's really hard because everyone's so different. But I just tell people in a general fashion is you want to work on exercises that are obviously going to down regulate, get your ribs down and back, but also get your ribs up and stuff like that. So if we think about flexing and always working on getting ribs down and then we forget about extension, then you're going to get hurt because you need to create extension to do a quality deadlift, or you need extension when you're squatting. So this is where context comes into play, because some people will say, well, you always need to have your ribs down and this and that. It's like, well, then go heavy deadlift and tell me that. Like, it's just not, and that's where we can't just, for an instance of down positioning the body, right? So Postural Restoration Institute, PRI, has phenomenal exercises to help improve your position. Now, I wouldn't necessarily do them like that when you're trying to load someone in a sense. And once again, it may be 5 pounds would be different than 300 pounds. So I'm not saying that we wouldn't load them to a small degree, but you have to really think about what's the goal and what are you trying to mirror it with. And we've seen good results from trying to, because a lot of people with CF, it's always upregulated. They're shortness of breath. They're trying to get air in. And a lot of times it turns into a subconscious, unconscious thing. They're just doing it. That's just like if you have a client and they're doing an exercise and you video them and then you show it to them or you take a picture like, oh, I didn't realize I was doing it this way. Like they're creating these, these engrams and patterns that they don't realize. So if you're someone with CF and you're upregulated, obviously you want to work on down-regulating, kind of getting back to the continuum on the other side. But then you need to shift to kind of more of the middle where you want some upregulation, but you want to be able, it's about control. And we're trying to establish that. So we're not just like, oh, meditation is the best approach. Meditation is phenomenal, but there's going to be a time where someone's going to cut you off. Everyone gets dialed up, and it depends on what the situation is. And this is where getting to know the individual, because some people you don't have to push too many buttons and they're just fired up, ready to go. Where other people, you can push every button they have and they're like, do you ever get mad? So taking that into context really helps us when we're talking about programming these exercises, because I got some people where I just, it's so hard to down regulate them because they've been doing it for so long. that it takes time. And so you want to position the exercises in the proper fashion, because if you alter something, it goes back to that athlete. They stretched them and he pulled a muscle during a game. So you have to take in where are we at in this program? Where are we at in their big journey of life? Because I have CF athletes that play sports, and if we mess with them 2 days before sport with a brand new breathing exercise, I could screw them up. Yeah. So you have to be ready to do a lot of things. Like in a perfect world, you may want to do X, Y, Z, but if they're playing or they have an event coming up or they're doing something, we may want to back off and wait and then just kind of monitor what's happening. Yeah. So it doesn't go too far to a negative side in a sense.
I think that it comes to that point of, looking at, depending on what like you mentioned there, the deadlift, look at your coach's toolbox to be what are we actually going to use, and look at what the person is, what the person needs. And as well, I quite like the book Mike Boyle uses of look at what buckets are full. And if you mentioned with someone, if they do need down regulating a little bit more, look at the buckets that are full, and look at the tools that you're going to use to actually help them progress and make sure that they are getting the best workout. Because I think you mentioned it before. It's their life. It's their life at the end of the day, and it's got to be the best process for them. We
think things differently, right? And what we want their goals to be. Like we end up having our own goals for them and thinking, we need to get them stronger and faster. Like, dude, yeah. I don't need to be that strong. I just want to do X. Like, oh yeah, right. We usually we push those goals harder than they do. Sometimes I've had clients like, hey Taylor, it's okay. This is all I need. I'm like, oh, okay, cool. All right, let's keep going then.
Yeah, I think sometimes that is, there's a guy that I work with at the gym that I'm at, and or a client that I work with at the gym that I'm at, and it got to a point where everything was, he'd put on some muscle, he'd lost a little bit of fat, all his lifts were going up, and I was thinking, sweet, we're going to be able to push it a little bit more. I can experiment with programming, we can do this, and what do you think to this? And when we sat down in the assessment, he basically just said, I'm pretty happy, really. I'm quite happy with how we're doing it at the minute. And yeah, I think that is often similar to the networking and referring side of things. I think sometimes, it's a two-way thing. Coaches work with the client and the client works with the coaches. But at the end of the day, it's the client that sort of dictates what they want to do. And going back to the Zumba point, if they really want to do Zumba, right, we're going to work around Zumba. If they get to a point where actually I'm quite happy with what I'm doing now, this is what we're going to work on, and we're going to make sure that you get the best results that you want from doing what you enjoy doing, which I think is sometimes forgotten as coaches, because there's that thing that as a coach you always want to implement on your client what you want to do. Whereas actually, it's what the client wants.
Right, and it has to be like taken with a grain of salt, because someone will listen and be like, okay, so you just doing whatever they want. No, it's like if someone's rehabbing, we need to do this. Like there is some, like, once again, we're talking everything with a grain of salt, right? Because certain things like, hey, we need to do this because research shows this is the best way to improve your knee or whatever it is. So it's not like it's like, hey, but at the same time, it's like, okay, if you have a general fitness person with no issues, stuff like that, and you've tested everything and they're good to go on everything, it's not going to hurt them if they're doing Zumba 3 days a week and you do weight training twice. Like, it may eventually shift too, because in 6 months they may love weight training so much that they want to weight train 5 days a week. It's like we just think that their answer today is going to be the same tomorrow, and in 4 months it may change, and so it's like as long as they keep showing up, I mean, it gives you potential for more. That's the thing.
So obviously we chatted there a little bit about building up lung function capacity through the strength training, and you mentioned about a 4-week program might take 8 weeks. In the case of actually building up lung function, lung capacity, with that, obviously you mentioned about a 4-week program taking 8 weeks. How would you look to progress the program to actually start building up that work capacity and building up the recovery between sets, if for example a 4-week program might take 8 weeks?
Yeah, so like I said, it will really depend, and it will really depend on their markers, like what's their strength levels and stuff like that, what's their aerobic capacity, because sometimes you have to pause things. So say they have a lung function of 80%, obviously we'd love them to be 100%. Well, with CF, we know that's not going to happen unless they get new lungs.
Yeah.
And you have to be like under 40% lung function to be even thought about for lungs in a sense.
Okay.
And so it's like, okay, it's just like the Boyle thing is like, if we have an 80% lung function, but their 10 rep max is off, let's focus on that. Once again, a lot of people will see if we're going to do cardio no matter what, because they know endurance training. So what we're doing is we're trying to, at Pulmonary Performance, really show that we need to integrate more strength training. We need to show that strength training is one of the keys to improving, overall quality of life and overall performance. Yes, we're not saying don't do cardio, but we're saying there needs to be just as much of importance. I mean, honestly, it should be everything should be an importance, flexibility, all of it. But we're trying to get people not to be scared of lifting weights and getting stronger. It's very similar to sometimes there's some people in the healthy population that are scared that if they lift weights, they're going to get bulkier. It doesn't change across the board, but it's also, there's not as much evidence to show how well strength training does in this population. So coming from the strength and conditioning background, like we push cardio, but I really love to see our clients lifting weights, and getting stronger and moving in different patterns and stuff like that. Now, if it's doing, isolated muscles, then that's fine. Like if someone's doing leg extensions, leg curls, because that's their jam, then that's what we'll work with for now. But I really focus in the beginning on, obviously, once we've improved core foundation, getting that going, then it's trying to progress the fundamentals, of, the push, pull, hinge, and squat, and relative to them too, in a sense, because I have clients that go to the gym, and then I have clients that will not go into the gym. I have clients that use oxygen tanks. So sometimes we're going to be set with, we want you to be able to do, we may want a guy to do 10 body weight push-ups, 3 sets of 10. That may be as far as we get to, without, obviously we progress it to make it harder, but in the top of exercises, if he's not going to go to the gym, then we're not going to get him to bench press, and if he's only going to do body weight exercises because he loves to run, well, hopefully over time, obviously we change that. But kind of going back to is the strength training, I think has shown a big improvement for, improving lung function. And if everyone can do a couple days, it's just, the hard thing is the variance of, the recoveries in between, because everyone's going to need a little bit different. I've learned a lot, like having a healthy individual do 4 sets of something. Someone with CF may do 1 to 2 sets and be, that's it. But this is like more like lower lung function. I have CF clients with, 90% lung function, and they're just crushing workouts in the gym. So this is not to say that, everyone's, weak or anything like that. Yeah. But it really depends. Like I just believe if we can improve strength, especially because of, biomechanics and forces and stuff like that, I really think it's going to have a huge improvement on respiration. Because once again, when you're talking about like lung tissue that's decreased, what that means is they have less capabilities to transfer the oxygen from, into the capillaries to then get the blood to then push it to the muscles. Yeah. And then obviously there's effects with the ion channels there. So if we can improve the strength, so when they're moving the muscles, they don't have to expend as much energy. That means the respiration is going to decrease to a factor. And due to the fact that there's so many forces with, with the world and stuff like that, that has a huge focus on that if we can get just people moving and with weights and stuff like that, improving strength, I think it's a huge factor with trying to improve lung function overall. So we really start with resistance training, because a lot of our clients are walking. They're doing something for the most part aerobically. If they aren't, we obviously start with like walking or on a bike or something like that. But eventually I want cardio to be on a ground, whether it's a treadmill, whether it's, walking outside, whether it's hiking, whatever it is, I want their feet hitting the ground, so then they can start to mirror things that are more functionally force related with the body.
Yeah. That is interesting, because obviously when you mentioned there about the broad spectrum of the variance in lung capacity, because you always think unsure, their lung capacity isn't as much, but I'm sure it is, like you've mentioned there, it is dependent on the person. When you mentioned there about if was it 30%, under 30% lung capacity for
Around 40. And once again, I forgot exactly the number, but
yeah.
I know under 40% is when you're really looking at possibly looking for lungs and stuff like that.
When looking at people who potentially might have had a lung transplant, how does that change, and how do they get back into training? Have you ever had any dealings with that?
Yeah, so I've actually had a couple clients, and when you get a lung transplant, you do a double lung transplant, so they have brand new lungs. The thing with lung transplants is the average age, mean age after doing a lung transplant, doesn't matter if it's CF related or anything, is around 5 years, just because you don't know if the body's gonna accept the lungs and stuff like that. So the first 5 years is like if you get past the first 5 years, you're golden. But obviously with that, the lung function's higher and stuff like that. So depending on if that's all that's needed to be done, it's easier in a sense, just because you're not dealing with that component of it. But if they're pancreatic insufficient, if they have CF diabetes, so once again, it may not just be a lung thing. It may be a GI tract thing. It may be a nutritional thing. Yeah. So sometimes it may not start off with us in a sense. We may focus just, core exercises, of respiratory breathing, and then their nutritionist just, pummel with focus more on that stuff. So then we can get weight up and stuff like that, if that's the case, and then kind of take it that route. But there's improved lung functions obviously makes programming a little bit easier in a sense. Yeah. But that's the thing with anything. If every trainer and everyone should be looking at specifics, doesn't matter if they're healthy or not. Like the more you know, the better.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting when you mentioned there about you would think that with a lung transplant, obviously the lung capacity, lung function will increase. But I suppose when you get to that point that it's got below 40% with an operation like that, you would sort of think from someone who doesn't 100% understand it, you'd think, oh well, do they end up starting from square one? But if they've got new lungs, the capacity will have increased. What are obviously you mentioned there with the amount of clients that you've worked with cystic fibrosis. What are the success stories that you've worked with, or for people listening? What are the success stories that you've seen from the training that you've used with your clients?
Well, it's kind of interesting because my clients have been. I was actually talking with my girlfriend the other day, and it's like my clientele has been very, very particular in a sense. So I've worked with people with MS. I have clients with Parkinson's. I've worked with the elite athletes, with the best of the best in a sense in baseball. I've worked with the hockey players. And honestly, it's very similar stuff. It's really all about programming, right? Obviously, some people are not going to be able to do certain things, but capacity is really based on, the frequency, the duration, the intensity, the volume and stuff like that. And I think that's the art of coaching. And when you're programmed for someone, everyone can do some form of something. Yeah. It's just depending on what intensity and capacity you're trying to accomplish, and then obviously progressing or regressing it, but also just really understanding the sport or what the goal is, because when you have to start looking at angles, like for a baseball player and stuff like that, the rotational forces, look at these different factors and stuff like that. So that's where things start to get very intriguing, because an exercise to improve their back muscles for throwing you may do a one-arm row, but depending on the angle and stuff like that, or depending on the exercise, it may not be the best back exercise what you're trying to accomplish and stuff like that. And so it's honestly a lot of stuff that we do is very, I guess Dan John would be the perfect. It's very, boring for people. We squat, we deadlift, we do core exercises, we do some breathing exercises, and we fluctuate. Yeah. The art and colorful part of it is just the programming of frequency, intensity, and how we progress it, and understanding that the continuum that they need to fluctuate back and forth through tension and then relaxation and then repeat numerous times depending on what it is, but also look at the duration at which they're playing or whatever they're doing. A baseball pitcher, takes, a second to throw a pitch, and then he has, let's say, 15 seconds off. I don't know the exact numbers, but if you're not training a baseball pitcher that way, then you're not training them to optimal levels. Yes, and that's the thing when we're talking about capacities and VO2s and stuff like that. There's research out there saying that, someone's VO2 on a bike may be, poor, but then they go and skate in the rink and they're phenomenal. Like, well, I don't understand. It's like, exactly. That's where the understanding is, like, because they're not built to ride a bike.
Yeah.
They're built to skate on ice.
Yeah.
They're built, like, they built their aerobic system or whatever it is. They built themselves, to do something. And so interesting enough to see a lot of strength from a lot of my athletes are from the ones that have done stuff outside. So, working with the elite athletes that are retired, they would like hammer, nails in the railroad or like, hammer a tire or carry, I had clients that worked on farms and stuff like that. And I've never met stronger people than, dairymen and stuff like that. I worked on a farm when I was 12, and I remember, I'll never forget it. I was shaking the boss's hand, and he was probably in his 70s, and I felt like he was going to rip my hand off or break it. And he was skinny. And I'm like, wait a minute. You put him in a gym and have him bench press, he gets destroyed. You ask him to move a hay bale, he'll crush anyone. Like, so it's like, so I think the success is doing indoor training and outdoor training. Like, go, like, in the summers, go, like, do stuff outside and just go to a dairy and ask, hold whatever it is. Like, you just got to do stuff that's just out of the norm, because it's too, there's too much feedback going on that can really help people that do a combination of both.
And as well, it adds in a little bit of variety and a little bit of fun, really, doing different things outside and as well in a gym.
Yeah, exactly.
So obviously, we've mentioned quite a lot about the research that you've done yourself, and at the start of this chat, you mentioned that there is still a lot more research to be done, and it's sort of ongoing. What are your thoughts on where the research should be going forward, and what more needs to be done to better provide a better service for people with cystic fibrosis, and sort of get the word out more about strength training and the programming side of things?
Well, I think it's definitely advancing. It's obviously, years behind just general, research on exercise performance in people. But I think it's obviously with, it's gaining ground and stuff like that with all the social networks out there and everything going on. But I think we need more people from the strength and conditioning side, in a sense, to collaborate with, I believe, the researchers and stuff. And I've kind of gone through that because, like I said, I've trained baseball players not all my life. I've still trained baseball players since I started. I still train general populations. I still work with other populations, just because I want to keep myself enriched in the environment. But it's a lot of just rehab and then push the individual off into the real world. And so at Pulmonary Performance Institute, what we try to do is create a platform so we can then, hey, go to us, see what you want to do based on the specifics, and then from there, do what you want. So I think we need a better funneling system in a sense of where to go, because a lot of times the medical staff is just like, we need you to, exercise. Like, okay, what do you want me to do? Walk 20 minutes? Like, they're very smart people for what they do. Like, I'm not a doctor, so I can't do what they do. And they're not an exercise physiologist, so they can't do what I do. They have general ideas, and I have general ideas from their perspective. So it's trying to team up more people from the outside that are not in the hospital. Hospitals, the rehab centers are phenomenal, but they're in the hospital. There's protocols with insurance, with the whole, the university, wherever they're at. And so sometimes, exercise physiologists in the hospitals would get pigeonholed, which is, there's only so much you can do. Very similar to physical therapy, when some places you get to see someone for 30 minutes. How are you going to make such an impact? So trying to get more people, trying to integrate a combination or collaboration where we're getting, coaches that see these individuals longer, for an hour, a couple days a week. And I think we just need to keep improving the literature done. Like in the books, like I was reading a book the other day, and it was just like pulmonary conditions you need to see a specialist for. And I'm like, and I think sometimes it's scared, because if you screw with someone, like you can hurt someone. So it just means you just have to be more particular, and you have to be focused, and if you really love your job and, and then you're going to be fine doing it. But I think sometimes there's a little scaredness to it because they're just starting to do exercise, a high intensity interval training with people's CF. And at first they didn't, they stayed away from it because of the intensity of it. They didn't want to create any pulmonary hypertension or cause any issues. And they're actually starting to find out that high intensity interval training is phenomenal for people with CF. I think we need to then just kind of not be as scared and just attack and say, hey, they're the same people as anyone else. The only difference is maybe lung function, maybe, it's things that are not going to, put someone, in a coffin in a sense. And I don't mean to be like that, but it's more just, we just need to keep moving forward, and we need to get a little bit more perspective from the strength and conditioning and the biochemists and stuff like that, and how to approach this. So it's not just all, rehab in the hospital, then see you later, keep on exercising type things.
Yeah, I think that's a nice roundabout way to sort of finish the chat, if you like. I think you don't want too much of the hospital side of things, and you don't want to go on the other end of the spectrum and have too much of the training side of things. I think exactly as you said, trying to find that balance and ultimately, work together to provide a better service. And exactly like you've said, the more literature and the more research that is done, and a little bit more, like we've touched on about, not everything is going to work perfectly. Life is going to sometimes get in the way, and the more information that's put out there that's real world relative is going to be a lot more beneficial. A topic that I wasn't 100% or I didn't know a lot about. I know I've taken a lot from that myself. From everything that we've covered today, what would be for everyone listening, what would be your take-home points or words of wisdom from what we've chatted about?
I think context. I think we need to all just sit back and look at the context of whatever we're looking at, listening at, feeling, whatever it might be. Because I think with a lot of the social media stuff out there and stuff like that, it's like there's so much things taken out of context when people post things, or people do this, or they say this, or they say that. And sometimes it can come off as attacking, and it's kind of ignorant in a sense, because you don't know the context of what it is. And if someone likes to do something and that's how they do it, then who cares? Like when it's all said and done, who cares? Like, why do you believe you have the capacity to sit there and say, you are doing this wrong, you need to do it this way, when you have no idea who the person is? Yeah. Like, you have no idea. And we could talk about, like, people, it could be an issue from like 10 years ago where someone had a personal thing where it's not what, there's a lot of triggers that can, do things. And just because they're doing it that way doesn't mean you're right anyways. So yeah. I think instead of attacking people or instead of doing stuff, we need to kind of sit back, and if we want to engage the situation, we need to fully understand the context before we start making opinions about this and that. Because what we're doing is we're spreading our whole community apart a little bit and saying, this is the only way to do something. This is the only way to do something. And it's like, well, it's really not, because if you look at all the sports out there, if you look at all the different exercise, ways to do it, this is not the only way to do it, because there's too many things that we still don't know about the human body to say, hey, this is the only way to do it. Yeah. But in just that, it's just also when you're reading stuff too, it's not just interacting with other people. It's just context. Take everything into context, see who the person that's wrote it, see if it's funded by something, because we always look at just the abstract, and you're not looking at the methods at which it was put together. A company could have gave someone $100,000 to do it a particular way, and they're going to take the money. So it's just, I think context is a big thing that I've learned over the years. Is like we need to listen a little bit more before we just decide to start, voicing our opinions. And sometimes too, I learned actually from my girlfriend, she's like, just because you have an opinion doesn't mean you need to voice it. I'm just like, ooh, yeah. She would tell me that. I'm like, well, you know what? You're right. It's like, who said that you wanted to hear me speak anyways, right? Yeah. So it's like, oh, okay. Yeah. Well played.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I think I'm a big advocate of, I always think you should be able to ask why. And, there's nothing, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I quite like being questioned, and if I don't have an answer, I'll go and find that answer, see whether what I was or what my opinion on it was right or wrong. And as well, you know, echoing what you've said is, I think it's okay. People should be a little bit more open-minded. It's never one size fits all. Things have changed, things have progressed. Yeah, you know, be open-minded, and that's fine.
Yeah, and if someone asks you questions, like you said, you don't have to feel threatened or stuff like that. Or at the same time, on the other hand, when you ask questions, don't try and do it in a way that someone feels like, you know, like how you ask questions. And this was something I learned with CF too. I tried to promote something one time as like, hey, help us cure CF through exercise. And I just got destroyed by the CF community because I used the word cure. And this is my first years. And I realized, and I was not talking about curing CF with exercise, but how I wrote it was taken differently. So it made me really, like, words and your approach to how you say something really matters. And I changed it. And it wasn't because of the content, but it was because of how I approached, you know, saying the things. And on both sides of it, we have to be willing for people to question us, because maybe they just want to learn. Yeah. But at the same time, we can't sit there and say absolute our thing is 100% accurate, and because there's too many different perspectives and stuff like that, and we can't get offended when people want to ask us questions. Yeah. You know, obviously the approach and how you take it should be, you know, in an appropriate manner. But this is why we're here. We're here to learn from each other, and we're here to progress, because when it's all said and done, we're in the fitness industry to help people, not just, this is not an ego thing. I want to be the strongest, fittest person alive. If you're in the fitness industry, it's obviously because you have a passion for fitness, but if you're helping people, you have to have a passion to help people, them get better, not just you. Like, it's not just about us, you know, and we need to take that into perspective a little bit when we're talking to people, because you can always learn something from anyone as long as you listen and keep an open mind, like you said.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good way to finish off on, you know, from a coach's point of view and from a client's point of view. You know, it isn't always about the coaches and as clients, you know, you should feel comfortable enough to ask questions, because, you know, I'm sure you've had clients as well that, you know, just generally want to know, just generally have a curious mind and want to ask questions, and, you know, why they're doing this, what are the benefits of it. Yeah, thoroughly enjoyed that chat. I know I've learned quite a lot from the topics
awesome.
that we've covered. For anyone either with cystic fibrosis or want to have a look at the work that you do, or have got any questions, and obviously you know, want to look and improve their training, where can people find you or get in touch with you for any questions?
Yeah, so we're actually, for the month of May too, we're doing an online exercise program free to anyone with CF that's over 18 years of age and older. All you have to do is go to pulmonary-performance.com and then click under pulmonary fitness under the CF division. Signups are there. But we have our Instagram, CF Fitness Institute, our Facebook page, CF Fitness Institute, our Cystic Fibrosis Fitness Institute, and I tell everyone, like, just if you have any questions or need any guidance, we do free exercise consultations with anyone with a pulmonary or respiratory situation. Just contact us and we'll set up that, because we're here to help and learn as well. Because as we advance our stuff, we want to know more and stuff like that. So they can check us out there at any of those sites.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah. Thoroughly enjoyed the chat. I hope everyone listening has sort of learned as much as it was a lot of a learning chat for me, as well as something that I wanted to. I wanted everyone to hear as well that, you know, a lot of the guests we've chatted to, and a lot of the content up out there is strength training to increase your 1 rep max, to put more muscle or anything. But ultimately, you know, the thing that overrides everything is, you know, general health, and I think that is summed up by, you know, the research that you're doing and the
quality of life. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks a lot for taking the time to chat with me, Taylor. I hope everyone enjoyed that as much as I did, and I will see you all next week.
Thanks again.